All right, folks, it's about 1:03 right now. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Kevin Yamashita. I'm a sales engineer at Sonoma Partners, and I'm looking forward to taking the next hour or so to talk to everyone on the line today a little bit about on Dynamics 365, which is the latest release for the Dynamics CRM platform. You know, one of the reasons that we thought it would be worthwhile to put this webinar together is because there has been a lot of news about Dynamics 365, and as we work with different clients, both existing clients and prospects, one of the consistent themes we're starting to hear is a lot of confusion around what Dynamics 365 really is. So I just want to start with two quick slides to help break down, from my perspective at least, what I think is a good way to describe Dynamics 365. And then from there, we'll spend a good part of the session actually jumping into the system and doing a little bit of demonstration of some of the new features and functionality. But specifically when we talk about Dynamics 365, the first thing that I want you to think of is that this is just another release in the standard Dynamics CRM release cadence. So for those of you that are particularly familiar with the platform, you know we started, way back. 4.0 is one of the earlier versions that people reference now. We had 2011, we had 2013, we had 2015, we have 2016. Well, you can think of Dynamics 365 as simply the Dynamics CRM 2017 release, applicable to both online and on-prem. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that this release has all the things that you expect. Net new functionality, some preview features to help us understand what's coming on the road ahead, and then a handful of under-the-hood improvements building on top of the platform, lots of bug fixes, lots of subtle tweaks, and then we also see a couple features coming up from preview and moving into general availability, things like relevant search and learning paths. And I don't want to spend too much time on this slide today because a lot of these features in the release are really the things that we're going to be talking a lot about a little bit later on in the conversation. Now, the other half of things, though, is that Dynamics 365 also represents a significant rebranding of the Dynamics CRM product. Okay? And really with this rebranding, we're reimagining the way that Dynamics goes to market, and also we're reimagining the way that we build within Dynamics and the ways that we use Dynamics. And really the idea here is that Dynamics CRM is no longer just a CRM system. Right? CRM calls for customer relationship management. And Dynamics is more than just a platform for managing customers. It really is an XRM platform. You can do so many different things for so many different use cases in so many different scenarios within Dynamics that calling it CRM is a little bit of a misnomer. And instead, we move to Dynamics 365. And really, in the Dynamics 365 platform, you have different apps or modules. And the modules will sound very familiar with anyone familiar with the platform. Sales, service, field service, project service, right? So with this rebranding, we're just changing the way that we think about the platform and really making it a little bit more notable that it is really a platform of modules with different features and functionality that can be built upon and shared across different modules. Now, something else I want to call out is in some of the marketing, you'll notice talks of both an enterprise and an SMB variant of Dynamics 365. When we talk about Dynamics CRM as it becomes Dynamics 365, we are talking specifically about the enterprise version. There is also an SMB version on the roadmap. That is not based on Dynamics CRM, and that is not released yet. Okay? So for our conversation today, when we talk about Dynamics 365, I want you to make sure to know that we're really specifically talking about the enterprise version of that product. Now, as we reimagine Dynamics CRM as an app-based platform, one of the things you start to see is this gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of how we leverage the solution. So one of the things that Microsoft is doing is they are now positioning Dynamics AX, one of their ERP platforms, is actually one of the apps or one of the modules in Dynamics 365. So in addition to sales, service, field service, and project service as Dynamics 365 modules, we are also going to see an operations module coming into the fold. And this is really just the online version of Dynamics AX. Now this has implications both in the short term and the long term. In the short term, There are implications specifically around consolidated licensing. Okay, that's really going to be the main thing here. Beyond that, AX, as it is Dynamics 365 operations, is still a separate application with a separate data model, with a separate database. Okay? That being said, long-term on the roadmap, we can expect native underlying integration between operations and the rest of the Dynamics 365 suite. And this is huge, right? This would be native integration between a Microsoft ERP platform and the Microsoft CRM or XRM platform. We begin to see how you can strand together different use cases between the sales process, the support process, the operations process, and tell a much more cohesive story. And the beauty of the D365 pivot is that there's an enhanced emphasis now on ancillary Microsoft technologies to stitch together all their service offerings. So we talk about something like Power BI, which is the business intelligence and reporting platform from Microsoft. Power BI has always had great connectors with AX. It's always had great connectors with CRM. It has great connectors to the rest of the native Microsoft data model inside of Office. And now you see that you can use Power BI as a layer to stitch together all these different services, from operations to sales to service. In that same vein, we are seeing new products from Microsoft, namely Flow and Power Apps, that do similar things. Now, we're going to talk about Flow a little bit later in the session, but essentially what you can think of Flow as is an if-this, then-that type of tool for creating actions and triggering actions based on different services in Dynamics. Right? So I could say, create a record in Dynamics 365 and maybe trigger some type of action in AX. Or maybe I can trigger an action on SharePoint or in Outlook. And the power of Flow, as you really dive into it, it is not specifically just Microsoft services. There's actually native add-ins and connectors for things like SurveyMonkey, Twilio for SMS text messaging. You even have Salesforce connectors. So you see that with something like Flow, you can tie together all these disparate Microsoft technologies that are already starting to become a little bit more cohesive and integrated, and then reach out to all the other technologies or all the other services in your IT infrastructure and start to do some really pretty interesting things. Power Apps is a similar technology where we can start to build different applications for the phone, for the tablet, for the web, based on top of whatever technology you want, whether it's a CRM database or an AX database or a SharePoint list or an Excel file in OneDrive for Business. And then we can deploy these different applications across the IT environment. Right? So you see that not only are we reimagining Dynamics 365 as a way to rebrand and rebuild and build on top of the Dynamics CRM system, but you're also seeing how other ancillary Microsoft offerings can help you to be more successful at doing that. Now, the last thing that I want to call out with this rebranding is that, unfortunately, there are increased license costs that come along with this. And for organizations that have existing licensing agreements, you're going to see that new licensing when it's time for your EA renewals, right? So I think that's something, while unfortunate, is really important to call out so that everyone knows that and can expect that as they start to embrace Dynamics 365. That being said, I think most of you here today came because you were interested in some of the new features and new functionality inside the Dynamics 365 platform. So enough with some of these slides. Let's go ahead and dive into it and actually play around with the system. All right, wonderful. So one of the things that struck me as I first started playing around with this new release is some of the features, I think, really make it easier than ever to find information and to work with that information and to work with that data. So for example, let's go ahead and jump to an opportunity list view in the system. And one of the things that you guys are going to immediately notice is that this particular opportunity list view looks significantly different than some of the views that you've seen in the past. And that's because with the D365 release, one of the coolest new features is a native editable grid control. So no longer are you stuck with list views that are read-only, where you have to click into each of the individual records to make some changes. With this new editable grid list control, we can actually jump in and edit different columns on the list on the fly. So if I'm doing opportunity management, it makes it simple for me to jump in and maybe change the topic of my opportunity. If I'm doing a pipeline review, I can quickly jump in and easily change my estimated revenue or change my probability, right? So this is something that in the past would required custom code, and now we have a native way to push these editable grids out there. One of the things that's particularly exciting about this is that these grids work both as list views here and also as subgrids on forms. So now I can have an account form with a related list of contacts, and I could actually have that contact list be editable right in line in the form. Furthermore, this editable grid is enabled both for the web client and for the native mobile client. So when I'm working on the go in the mobile client, sometimes I don't want to jump into an opportunity. It's just too cumbersome when I'm using my phone. Now I have an editable grid that makes it a little bit easier to work with some of that rich CRM data. You can see here that I'm able to do a couple interesting things. So I can group my opportunities together if I wanted to, just like that. And then, of course, this native control respects JavaScript, business rules, field level security, right? So all those other elements of the system that we're already used to are supported fully with this editable grid. Now, of course, there are a couple limitations that I want to call out to you guys. Number one is that you can't create new records in line in this grid. If I wanted to create a new record, I would still have to go to the toolbar, hit the new record button, and pop open a new record creation form. That's one limitation. Another limitation is that currently all of the service calls that this grid makes are synchronous. And for you non-technical people in the room, what that really means is that there is a small performance hit when you are using this grid. Now, when you're using it from a list view like this, that's not a particular problem. Where that becomes a little bit more problematic is when you have a form with multiple subgrids, all of which are editable, then you start to have some performance concerns that you're going to be wanting to be cognizant of. The other thing to call out is you'll notice that there's this Show As button up here at the top of the screen. So you as an admin have to enable the editable grid. But once you do, you define universally for that entity whether you want it enabled by default or not. So that is to say, once I enable editable grid, every user that loads the opportunities page will either get the editable grid or the read-only grid, depending on what I set as my default. But that is not something that you can set at a user-specific level. Okay? So I think, from a Sonoma partner's perspective, this is a great first stab at an editable grid control. And for 60 to 80% of use cases, I think it's a great fit for organizations. That being said, I do want to mention to everyone on the line that editable grids are something that Sonoma has been doing custom for a long, long time. So if this doesn't meet your need and you're just looking for other alternatives, if being able to create a new record on the form itself, on the grid itself is important to you, there are solutions out there in the marketplace. Sonoma offers some. There are other partners and consulting firms that have their own offerings. So don't think that all is lost, but know that the need for that is really becoming less and less as Microsoft invests in different offerings like this. So in addition to being able to work with data very easily, I think in the latest release of Dynamics 365, it's also easier to find data than ever before. You'll notice that I type in Sabre to this search control. We get a handful of results. So gone is the multi-entity category search, and that's been replaced with this new relevance search. And for those of you that have been following Microsoft releases relatively closely, you know that relevance search was actually something that was released as a preview feature a while ago. Well, this has now been released in mass and is generally available. And relevance search is really pretty powerful, right? Because you can think of it as a Google or a Bing style search. And one of the things I think is most interesting about relevance search is that it uses the Azure text analysis service, right? So previously, all the searches inside of Dynamics 365 or Dynamics CRM used begin with logic. So that's to say if I wanted to type something in or search for something, it would search for phrases that began with my search terms, which could sometimes be limiting. Now, by using topic-based analysis, we have a little bit more freedom. Oops. Implementation. Here we go. So one of the things you'll notice is if I want to find an opportunity called CRM implementation, in the past, to find that hit, I would have had to include that leading asterisk. But notice in this particular case, I don't have to do that because the text analysis service takes care of that for us and really is finding general topics of text and matching those up to our search terms and search parameters. Really powerful when you're on the go and trying to find something in a pinch. Another thing that is particularly interesting about the latest release with relevant search is that now we're able to search notes and activities, right? So I can expose different activities based on the descriptions that I might have left. I can expose different records based on the contents of the native notes that are attached to them. This really exposes a wealth of information in the system that previously would have been so much harder to find. Now, one of the things that I will note is that in order to enable relevant search, you have to be okay with your data being passed to Azure, okay? So the actual processing of the search occurs on the Azure servers. So that is something to consider. That being said, there are no additional fees for this functionality, as you will see with some of the other Azure-related services that we talk about later. All right. So editable grid and relevant search. I think, in my opinion, two different features that make it easier than ever to find data and to work with that data in the system. Beyond that, some of the other features that we have in D365, I think really enable folks to work smarter, not harder. Let's take a look at that. So as I jump to this opportunity record in the system, one of the first things you're going to notice is that the BPF, the business process flow at the top of the screen, has taken on a slightly new look. Okay? So in the latest release, we see a new UI for the business process flow. Beyond that, there are also a couple under-the-hood type of changes that make BPF a little bit easier to work with and help allow users to leverage BPF so they can be more efficient and more successful. One of the things you'll note is we now have a timer that indicates how long a given BPF stage has been active, right? So instead of having to develop custom plugins and custom scripting to figure out time and stage for some of your dashboards and some of your higher level analytics, now these metrics are being captured automatically. And we can continue to use all the Dynamics tools that we know and love, like workflow automation, to write different actions that might happen when we exceed certain thresholds, to notify managers when something has been in stage too long. And then using a tool like Power BI, like we talked about before, we can then take a look at some of the stuff at an aggregate level to really understand what is the average time and stage that we're seeing as our opportunities progress. How does that differ for opportunities that are won versus lost? And we can start to make some informed decisions based on that. The other thing that changes with business process flow in this latest release is that it's a little bit easier to switch between processes. In the earlier incarnations of business process flow, it was imagined as really a tool where there was simply one BPF per record. But as users have embraced BPF, we realize that that's not necessarily the case. Maybe there are multiple processes that we want to run concurrently for a given record. With this switch process button now, and this abandon button now, it makes it easier than ever to associate multiple BPFs with your record and to discard those BPFs if they're no longer relevant. Another way we can have the system work smarter for us so that we don't have to work harder is with something called document recommendations. So if you configure your system to allow you to store documents, and that can be document storage on SharePoint, on OneDrive for Business, on O365 Groups, you know that it's a great way for folks to store documents and collaborate. But one of the hardest things can be uncovering documents that other folks might be working on. There's not a really great way to do lateral exploration to see what documents my peers are using to help be successful. Well, in the latest version of Dynamics 365, we have something called document suggestions. As I jump to my documents grid on my opportunity record, I can hit the Show Suggestions button, and it's actually going to expose a list of related files, related documents that might be relevant to me based on the record I'm looking at. And essentially what's happening behind the scenes is Dynamics is using that relevant search that we just talked about. And it's saying, here is my record, in this case my opportunity. Let me leverage relevant search to find other opportunities that are similar based on option sets, based on text fields, based on date fields, based on owners, based on all these different criteria. It's then looking at all of the associated documents, like we talked about. That's SharePoint, OneDrive, and Office groups. And then it's able to expose those for me on this original record. So this is a great way for organizations that are already taking advantage of document storage inside of Dynamics 365 to allow users to start to discover what documents their peers are working on. They can take advantage and not have to reinvent the wheel. I think that's really, really powerful and a great way to let the system work for you. All right. Changing gears now, let's go ahead and jump to another opportunity record in the system. And I want to talk about some of the preview features that we have to allow the system to work for you. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with the term preview feature, essentially, a preview feature is just that. That is a feature that is being released, but is essentially in beta. So it's liable to change. It's not ready for production use, but for early adopters, folks that are really excited about the platform, it's a chance to play around, to understand that functionality, and to potentially even give some feedback back to Microsoft about usage. What works? What doesn't work? Okay? So this next set of features that we're going to talk about are all in preview right now, but I think they're remarkably exciting and really help you understand where Microsoft is driving the Dynamics 365 platform. Okay. The first feature I want to talk about is something called Relationship Assistant, which is essentially a new type of proactive alert that we can develop inside of the platform. And you'll notice Relationship Assistant right at the top of the screen above the activity pane. Essentially what Relationship Assistant is a mechanism or a vehicle for creating what we call cards and surfacing those cards to users based on different conditions in the system. So in this particular record, we can see some cards that were created. In this particular card right here, no activity with contact, the system is proactively letting me know that for a given contact record, there have been no activities logged in the system since Thursday, January 12th. Similar but different, you can see to the right, we have cards that can indicate things like when an opportunity is close to closing, or when an opportunity should have closed, but no updates have been made on that opportunity. All right? So a lot of times, these are the types of things that we're used to getting emails for. But emails tend to clutter up our inbox. People start to ignore them, and then everything starts to fall apart. With a Relationship Assistant, we have a new way to deliver these messages. We have a way to make these messages record-specific to reduce clutter in email and allow users to stay in the system and keep them as efficient as possible. Now, a lot of the cards that are used are based on CRM data in the system, but generally speaking, we presuppose or we assume that there's some type of Exchange integration configured. And the reason that we make that assumption is a lot of these cards will be triggered off of things like email activities, appointments, phone calls to some extent, right? So certainly you could create a system where you're doing the creation and the management of all those activity records directly in CRM, but more likely than not, you're going to be using Outlook for this. And that's great, because now your users can use Outlook transactionally just like they're used to. You can have all that data flow inside of the Dynamics 365 system, and Relationship Assistant can automatically pick all that stuff up, synchronize those activities with the different records they correspond to, and now you get your proactive alerts just like that. We have a couple different types of cards that are in the system, so let me show you a couple different examples. If I jump to this Darren Parker contact record, some of the more exciting cards, in my opinion, are cards like this. Potential leads. Darren Parker said, I'm interested in learning more about your service. And Relationship Assistant is automatically picking that up because, you know what, that sounds like an email that might need to be converted to a lead record, right? So the system is actually analyzing the text of some of these emails and trying to indicate whether or not there's something we need to take action on. There's other cards that will say, you know what, this contact is asking you a question. Make sure you reply back to them. All great ways to allow the system to work for you so that you can be as efficient and proactive as possible. And very quickly, in case anybody's interested, I'll open the settings, and you can see a list of some of the different cards that we have. Post-meeting follow-ups, task due dates, email cards related to meeting requests, file requests. We're shortly going to talk about email engagement. We'll actually be able to see when emails we send from Dynamics 365 have been opened and read, and things like today's cards, so digests about upcoming meetings. All sorts of really useful data that is created based on just the normal transactions you're already doing in Dynamics 365, which can be so powerful. Not only are we able to see cards on top of records, we can also drop cards on dashboards. And there is a new control on the native mobile application for phones and tablets where you can actually drop cards for the mobile applications as well. Really pretty powerful, pretty cool stuff. All right. Another cool feature related to Relationship Assistant is something called auto capture. So being an implementation partner, we work with a lot of firms, and one of the biggest draws of Dynamics as a platform is the rich native integration between Dynamics and Exchange. And oftentimes what we hear customers saying during the sales process, we want to track all of our emails. Every email comes in, we want to go ahead and track it in Dynamics so that we have a record of it. Now, for any of you that are live on the system already, you probably are laughing at that because you know exactly how this story actually plays out. Generally speaking, we never enable email tracking en masse. Instead, it's really a system where folks have to individually track emails that are relevant from within the Outlook client. All right? And what this generally means is that either we're not tracking all the emails that we need to track because people choose not to. Sometimes they just forget, right? Well, with auto capture, which relies on server-side sync, we're now able to drop this new type of entry into the activity screen in the activity pane. And what's happening right here is the system is actually saying, you know what? I see for the users associated with this opportunity that there are some emails in Exchange that have those email addresses on them that are not currently tracked in the system. And it's going to go ahead and suggest, you know what? Do you want to track this email and associate it with this opportunity? And if I wanted to, I could go ahead and track this email, which is currently just in Exchange, not in Dynamics, and then track it in the system just like this by hitting that track button. That's hugely powerful because no longer are we asking users to jump out to Outlook to go ahead and track emails. If they are doing transactional operational things in an opportunity record or in a contact record, all they have to do is scroll through the activity pane to see emails that might be relevant, and they can track them right there. That's pretty cool. And the other thing that I mentioned is that this is actually not looking at an email address on the opportunity form. It's actually looking at the related sales team and pulling the email from those contacts. So you can take it a couple steps and really allow the system to work for you. Of course, security is respected, so I'm only going to see this auto capture suggestion if I am a recipient on that email. But what I think is even more exciting is that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Currently, the product team at Microsoft is looking into things like, can we easily track appointments coming from Exchange? And then taking this a step further, they're asking the question, what about phone calls for Skype for Business, for normal Skype? You can see how powerful that can start to be because then we start to be able to track all these transactions with our customers and our clients automatically in the system without that much extra brain power, giving you better data for better analytics, for a better sense of who you're talking to and who you're not talking to, right? And that's how you really can take advantage of a CRM system. Really, really exciting stuff. All right. The next feature I want to show you that's going to allow us to work smarter, not harder, and to let the system work for us is something called email engagement, another preview feature. Now, email engagement, go ahead and jump into this email record. Email engagement is a feature related to something that the marketing automation folks have had for a long time. Essentially, it's the idea to see whether your emails are received and whether they've been opened. Right? So as I jump into an email record, you see this new control on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. And we're able to see right here, recipient activity will be followed. So no longer is it just a tool for the marketing folks to be able to see whether or not our emails are received. This is now functionality we're able to push out to salespeople en masse. In addition to being able to see whether our emails are opened, to being able to see whether our attachments are downloaded, we can also schedule emails to be sent at a later time So if I have follow-up emails I want to send, instead of having to actually wait to the time I want to send them to queue them up, I can actually write them all today and queue them up for the next week. And then if I need to follow up at some point, I can have the system automatically remind me to follow up on an email. It can create a task record, and it can take advantage of the relationship assistant cards that we just saw. So taken together, relationship assistant, auto capture, and email engagement, this represents a whole new generation of tools available to sales staff in terms of engaging with clients and being proactive and being prepared. And like I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, I use the term sales staff, but you know what? In an XRM system like this, these features and this functionality is available to everyone for all sorts of different use cases. And at least in my opinion, I think that's what's most exciting about this, is we're really able to empower all end users to take advantage of these features and these tools to really be as efficient and as productive as possible. All right. Two more ways that we can allow the system to work for us are related to Azure Cognitive Services, or Azure Machine Learning. Clearly, machine learning is one of the biggest buzzwords we've been hearing in the CRM space for the past couple years, and it's exciting that within the latest Dynamics 365 release, we're actually able to see some of this machine learning come to. Right? So let me show you a little bit about what we can do there. I'm going to go ahead and jump back to one of my opportunity records, and the first feature that I want to show you is something called product recommendations, and it's exactly that. Essentially, the idea is that if I take advantage of native products within the dynamic system, I can then, let me refresh my page because I'm going to need that toolbar. If I take advantage of native products within the dynamic system, I can actually send my data to an Azure server, and I can perform machine learning on top of all of that data. The machine learning algorithms will then be able to spit back and tell me cross-sell and upsell recommendations based on historical evidence. So let's go ahead and see kind of what that looks like. All right, that looks better. So I jump into my opportunity record. You see that I have a couple product-based entries, or just one in this particular case, and I can go ahead and then click Show Products, Show Suggestions. And for those of you that are familiar with the earlier version of this, in one of the previous releases, 2013 or 2015, I think, you were able to do rules-based associations, right? So you could say for product A, I want to define product B as an upsell product or a substitute product or an accessory product. And that was great if you had a small number of products, but if you had a product catalog of hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of products, that just doesn't make any sense. You can't define all those distinct relationships, right? But as I scroll up, you see this new section, this cross-sell recommendations right here. What's actually happening is the system is returning back to me different recommendations based on the product that I've input, also based on the fields on the opportunity, and on the account record. And the system is looking at other opportunities, other quotes, other orders, and the related products and the related accounts, and then spitting back ratings for different products that I might want to suggest. So you can see I have a couple products right here that have a rating of 0.67, 0.64. You can see those ratings decrease as we go on, right? So taking advantage of machine learning, we're actually able to make product cross-sell recommendations based, again, just on that transactional data that you already have in your system from performing your business operations over and over. This is hugely powerful, all right? Now, product recommendations is a preview feature, so it is not ready for general availability. And the other stipulation that I want to call out is that this does require an Azure service subscription, okay? So this sits upon the Azure Product Recommendation Service, and there are some nominal fees associated with that. Now, those are all usage fees, and there is a free level tier where if you have a smaller number of calls, there are no charges associated with it. But I do want to be very clear about the fact there are additional fees associated with this if you did want to roll it out. But it's a great way to start to take advantage of machine learning within your system. All right. Another feature that takes advantage of Azure Cognitive Services is going to be sentiment analysis. Okay? So sentiment analysis is something that we saw previously when Microsoft released Microsoft Social Engagement. Right? There was sentiment analysis that would allow you to see for a given Facebook post or a given Twitter post, is that a relatively positive or a relatively negative statement? Well, that ability and that capability has been made more universal because it's been released, again, as an Azure Cognitive Service, right? And what we can do then is on a case, for example, look at maybe the title, maybe the body. If you want to be more real about this, maybe you do this for inbound emails, right? And we can derive a sentiment score based on that text. So in this particular example that we're looking at right here, you can see that I'm actually keying my sentiment based off of the case titles. And I have my cases sorted by sentiment with the lowest scores at the top and the highest scores at the bottom. And essentially the way this works is a score of 0 is as negative as possible. A score of 1 is as positive as possible. And a score of 0.5 is relatively neutral, right? And just reading through some of the text and some of the scores, you can see that this service is actually pretty legit, right? One of the things I think is interesting is notice that I use the word Unreal for 2 different entries. Unreal process for handling refunds is a relatively negative sentiment, and it got scored appropriately. Unreal customer service thanks is a relatively positive sentiment, and it got scored appropriately. Even though both have that word Unreal in it, the system is treating them as expected, right? So again, the Azure Cognitive Services tools that we need, in this case the text analytics service, do require additional Azure licenses and subscriptions. That being said, you can start to see how this can be really powerful stuff. You know, maybe we have a workflow in place where we take inbound emails and automatically create cases out of them. I could then have sentiment analysis run for those emails when they come in, and I can score them. That allows us to sort our inbound emails so I can deal with the most unhappy customers first. Or maybe I want to set up some escalation rules so if someone has a sentiment score below 0.1, we automatically route that to Tier 2 support so we can try to keep our customers as happy as possible. This is also great because as a support rep, then I know exactly what type of call I'm going to have, a happy call, an unhappy call, before I actually get on the phone and start interacting with some of our users. Let the system work for you so you can work smarter, not harder. All right. The other thing I want to mention is in order to do this, to make this functionality behave, I actually took advantage of Microsoft Flow, that tool I mentioned earlier for stitching together different services. So out of the box, there's no way to natively plug in sentiment analysis in Dynamics 365. What did I do here? I created a custom field called sentiment. And then I created a Microsoft Flow. And essentially what I was able to do with native connectors is say, upon creative case, look at the title. Execute that title in the sentiment analysis tools for Azure Cognitive Services. Take my score and write it back to the sentiment field in that case record. Took me less than 10 minutes, as easy as that. But you start to see really the power of the possible, right? And you start to see really where you can go with the platform as you start to stitch these different tools and these services together, which I think is pretty exciting and pretty interesting. All right. A few more features I want to cover, and then we'll be all set. This next one here is an interesting one. So for those of you that are really passionate about Dynamics 365 or Dynamics CRM, you know that the project service and the field service offerings were released for general availability about a year ago, right? And when that happened, there were a handful of different tools to facilitate scheduling. Well, with D365, one of the interesting things that's happened is that scheduling between project service and field service has actually been merged. The underlying data model for scheduling resources, whether it's for field service purposes or project service purposes, is one and the same. We use the same resource records now. We use the same booking request records. We also now use the same schedule board. So the schedule board has been unified across project service and field service. That's really powerful and really useful. For those of you that are familiar with the field service tool, you'll also see that the schedule board has been revamped from a UI perspective. But what I really want to talk about today is this down at the bottom. Not only have we unified scheduling between these two applications, but we've also enabled something called generic resource scheduling. Essentially now, in addition to scheduling work orders and projects, I can enable any entity in the CRM system as schedulable. Let me say that one more time so it sinks in. I can enable any entity in the system as schedulable, right? So if I go ahead and jump back to the 20th, you can see that I have a project that's scheduled, I have a work order that's scheduled, and I have some opportunities that are scheduled. And if I look down in my schedule depot at the bottom, I can see I have booking requirements for work orders, projects, and opportunities. So when we talk about D365 as a platform for all your different applications, for all your different use cases, with tools that span the modules and applications, this is exactly what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter if you are doing project service workflows or field service workflows or something completely different. I now have one central place I can do to do all of my logistics and all of my scheduling operations. This is huge, especially if you have folks that are in hybrid roles that might span multiple areas of the organization, right? Maybe I have a technical resource that is responsible for dealing with field service, on-site support requests. But maybe that same resource also deals with opportunities, doing technical product demonstrations. And maybe that resource needs to be scheduled for both of those different operations. With the unified scheduling board and generic resource scheduling, I can now actually schedule against both of those use cases in the same place. And to take it one step further, Microsoft is looking at continuing to build out some of the integration between Dynamics and Outlook. So currently, in the D365 release, I have one-way integration. So I can now send Outlook meeting invites from Dynamics to a user's Exchange calendar once these bookings are made. That is just hugely powerful, and I'm really excited about some of the things that customers are able to do or are going to be able to do with some of this functionality. All right. Then the last thing I want to show you today is an overhaul of some of the admin tools within the system. This stuff is a little less flashy, a little less exciting, but I'm sure we have some admins on the call right now, and I think for folks that spend a lot of the time doing configuration dynamics, it's nice to know that you're finally getting some love. So one of the things you'll see as I jump over is that the Business Process Flow Designer has got a new UI. We're able to build out each of our different stages. I'm able to build out each of my different steps. You can also see now it is a little bit easier to embed workflows directly into your steps. We can now have workflows that get triggered automatically based on entry into different steps. And you can also have global workflows that run in general when a BPF is applied. That's pretty interesting and exciting. This same UI overhaul has been performed for business rules. So it's now a little bit easier to configure and build business rules in the system. But I think the thing that is most exciting is the app designer. So I mentioned that we have multiple apps in the system. There's this concept of apps, sales, service, project service, blah, blah, blah. Well, what is an app? An app essentially is a new way to encapsulate functionality in Dynamics. So previously, if I had, say, maybe 3 different roles spread across 3 different operating groups or business units, and I had unique forms and BPFs and entities for all those different intersections, I might need to have up to 9 security roles to control what users could see if I wanted to do restrictions based on things like forms. Now, oops, let's try this one more time. Now using the app designer, oh, I see what I did there. I didn't open the designer, I opened my app. Now with the app designer, I'm actually able to build out different apps that allow you to encapsulate all those different features. So let's go ahead and jump back over and I'll show you what that looks like. And this time Kevin will pay a little bit more attention. All right, perfect. So what you can see here now is I'm able to define in a given application, what are the dashboards I want exposed? What are the business process flows I want available? What are the entities that I want my users to see? And for those entities, what are the forms, views, and charts I want them to have access to? This is great because no longer do I need to have 700 security roles to manage all of this stuff. I have a new layer and a new platform and a new place where I can start to do this to reduce the need to have extraneous security roles just to manage access to things like forms. Okay? One of the other things that's nifty is that this is not overly restricted. So if there is an entity in the system that is not listed here that I have access to because of my security role, I'll get access to everything unless it's built out and defined here. So it's also a situation where you don't have to be worried about necessarily hiding too much from your end users, having any danger there. And of course, this is all simply visibility, right? At the end of the day, security roles and basic permissions there still supersede absolutely everything else. So the app builder, interesting, pretty cool. Let's take it one step further. Notice we have the sitemap in the top. You can also define unique sitemaps per application. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, that's great, but sitemap configuration is awful. I hate modifying the XML. Well, gone are those days as well. Built out in the same new configuration UI is a graphical sitemap designer, right? So now it's as easy as dragging and dropping if I want to have different areas, different groups, different sub-areas. And if I still need some of the fine control that I had with the XML configuration, all of those same features, being able to control privileges, clients, all the same features are still available in the sitemap designer, but now we have a graphic user interface instead of having to use a text editor to do basic XML configuration. So again, nice to see that the admins of the world are finally starting to get a little bit of love. Now, again, one thing I do want to warn people about. While we have seen the sitemap designer function fine for net new projects, in some cases there have been compatibility issues with sitemaps that had previously been configured outside of the sitemap designer. As we have gone through, we've been able to figure out what some of those issues are. We've removed some of the lines of code that were causing compatibility issues. So generally, just a word of warning, be careful. If you are going to light up this feature, if you're going to start using it, just know there might be some growing pains where you need to make some modifications and do a little bit of investigation with your sitemap. And certainly that's something that Sonoma can help you guys with if you're struggling through it. But it's just a word of warning. But again, really excited to see this feature enabled and now available to folks. All right. And really, that's everything I had for today. Hopefully, this has been a beneficial whirlwind through just some of the features released in Dynamics 365. This has certainly not been everything. And frankly, I think there's some features in some of the early releases like 2016 that are still not getting the love and traction they need. So if you're interested in having a deeper dive conversation about features, functionality, what works for you, how can things work for you better, that's what Sonoma is here for. So reach out to your existing counterparts if you know them, or if you're someone that doesn't have an existing relationship with Sonoma partners, my contact information is available here, and we always love to hear from folks on our website as well. That being said, with the 10 minutes that are left, if anyone has any questions for me, feel free to drop those in the chat window right now. I'll go ahead and stick around for a little bit, but if you don't have any questions or have to get out of here, certainly thank you for your attention. All right, one question from the group. Oh, this is a good one, and this is one that I did not mention, so thank you for reminding me. Question is, of the features and functionality we talked about today, what is available for online versus on-prem? Okay. So the answer here is that a good number of the features that we saw are currently available for online only. Going through the list, those features are document suggestions, relevant search, relationship assistant, and all the related things, so email engagement and auto capture, app designer, sitemap designer, and generic resource scheduling. Okay, so a good number of these features are released for online only right now. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't make their way to the on-prem version eventually. For those of you that are familiar with the Microsoft release cadence, right, we get online updates every 6 months. And then realistically, on-prem updates that bring some of those online features to on-prem about once every year. right? So in about 6 months or so, I wouldn't be surprised if the latest on-prem release might have some of these online-only features that were finally lit up for on-prem, but don't expect to see everything in on-prem. The trend that we've been seeing for the past couple releases is there's always a couple cool features that are online only as kind of that carrot to get folks to migrate online. In addition, there are sometimes technical considerations that prevent things from being deployed on-prem if they rely on other services in the cloud. That's one of the reasons that relevance search, for example, I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that stayed an online-only feature for the foreseeable future. But great question. And if you do have any other questions about online versus on-prem, feel free to reach out individually if you'd like to understand some of the nuance there. That being said, I'm not seeing any other questions from the group right now. So I'd like to, again, thank everyone for their attention today and invite you to reach out to us here at Sonoma Partners if you have any questions. If something you saw today got you excited, we're always available to help and assist as necessary. So thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your days. Bye-bye.